is horns. Now the thing you got to remember, horns are basically the same as claws or toenails or hooves, just on the other end of the animal. Okay? These are not bone. Can I say it again? They're not bone. Horns come from a horn bud that's an immature thing. And essentially it's the same thing as we're talking about with claws. Okay? They come from an extension, or they surround an extension from the frontal bone from animals that have horns, like sheep, goats, cattle. Okay? This frontal bone has a sinus that goes up into it. Okay? And it can extend quite a ways up into it. If you look at the picture there, you can see on that cow horn, the sinus goes all the way up inside of them, okay? Now think about that for a second. Go down to the toe and the claw, and what is the extension of bone into the claw? What is the extension of the bone that goes into the claw? Huh? I can't hear you. The extension of the bone that goes into the claw. We had it just last week, guys. Called the ungual process. Okay? Surrounding the ungual process is you guys are killing me. We just did it last week. Were you guys here last week? The corium surrounds the ungual process. Now, turn that upside down and put it on the skull, and you've got it back. It's essentially the same thing. The extension of the frontal bone goes up into that, like the ungual process of P3. Surrounding the ungual process of P3 is the corium. Well, surrounding the extension of the frontal sinus up into that area, there is vascular tissue that surrounds that as well. Okay? So it looks essentially the same thing. That corium goes in there and it gives blood supply, gives nerve supply. That horn material is secreted or created by the cells around the outside edge, or what would be what if it was a hoof? The analogous structure in the hoof is what? Did nobody study? The coronary band. Okay? That same structure is going to create the keratinized cells that then become the tubule, or become the horn. And they're formed in tubules to give it strength. So what does that tell you about the horn that's analogous to a claw? Huh? I can't hear you.
They're really strong.
But what's analogous to it about the claw? It doesn't fall off, but it continues to grow constantly. Okay? Just like claws do. Just like a hoof will. It'll continue to grow unless you bring in a farrier to trim the foot. Okay? Now, the structure of the horn is entirely dependent upon the species and which animal in that species. So you can see Texas longhorns that have a different shape of horn. You can see Herefords. You can see these zebu cattle. They all have different kinds of shapes depending on the kind of animal. A bighorn sheep. You guys been out to Boulder City and looked at bighorn sheep? It's the same thing, but they have a different shape. Okay? The structure is essentially the same, unless the animal is polled. A polled cow or bull has no horns. Like polled Herefords are hornless Hereford cow. but then if they're not polled, that means they are able to have horns. Okay? Because these things grow continually, they have the potential of getting extraordinarily long, like Texas Longhorns. My arm width is not even long as some of the Texas Longhorn. Okay? They constantly grow. They don't shed off. That's why a lot of times they have to be trimmed as they get bigger. And that brings us to antlers. Antlers are not horns. Should I say it again? Antlers are not horns. No matter what anybody says, they're antlers. Okay? Technically, they're not even the integument. Antlers are surrounded when they're first growing by the integument. And that surrounding tissue that's around the bone is called the velvet. And it's very soft looking, kind of smooth, okay? And that's where all the vascular tissue is. Because this is surrounded by that vascular tissue, what's happening on the inside of that is bone production. And we've already talked about bone production a long time ago. And it's endochondral ossification, which means what? Starts out as cartilage, and then it's going to change to bone. So antlers are bone. Antlers are generally seen in the male. Occasionally you might see a female with antlers, but that means there's a genetic aberration. Something's gone wrong to where the female now has the antlers. Okay? Antlers, because they are bone and they grow through endochondral ossification, as the antlers grow and get really big real fast, all of a sudden they outgrow the blood supply. And the blood supply just starts to fall off. And that velvet just starts to get really ragged. And you'll see the antlered animal go up into the trees or next to a rock or something. They'll rub their antlers against a tree or something, and all that velvet stuff just falls off of it. Which now means what? Huh? I can't hear you. Lost what? Lost what? Blood supply. If you don't have blood supply, what happens? It dies. If something dies in the body, what happens to it? The body gets rid of it. So antlers fall off every single year because they've lost their blood supply. Okay? So antlers during the spring, they grow really, really fast. They've got the velvet covering around them. As they get a little bit older and as the season starts to change a little bit toward fall, the velvet goes away and the antlers are now dead bone. And it takes a while for the body to say, hey, you don't have any blood supply, you're out of here. And usually about the end of the fall, into the early winter, the antlers fall off. I remember I was up deer hunting one year, and I'm walking along, and all of a sudden I look through the trees and I see a big buck just standing there. But he's only got one antler. That's not good. When I watched him for a while, all of a sudden he reaches up with his back foot and kicks off the other one. I went up, picked up the antler, and there's a blood spot, just a tiny little blood spot, right where the antler attached to the skull. So you can see that there's not enough there to keep that bone alive. And it literally is just bone. Okay, so you guys need to know the difference between horns and antlers. Right? Everybody got it? Go ahead.
Or tusks then?
Tusks or teeth? You haven't even got to that part yet.
This might be a silly question, but with antlers, if they have blood supply in their bones, so they have like a medullary cavity.
Yeah,
So could
but
you
it fills
put
up.
with, it fills up?
Yeah, it gets filled up. It's all grown up. Then all of a sudden, it's not full anymore. It doesn't have any medullary cavity anymore.
And then right before it falls off?
Well, it takes a while.
So if I, can I put some io catheter in an antler?
No, you never get there because it goes down into the skull and then stops.
Okay.
Sides are really a lot harder. Other questions? All right, so what that means now is you guys are finished with mammals.